Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I can read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. So before we dive into Melissa's letter today, I just want to take the time to again introduce a returning guest, Amy, who's a fellow team member. Amy, would you love to reintroduce yourself for those who may be new and or ongoing listeners to this podcast?
Yes, absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be back. I love nothing more than chatting about all of this with Ken and all of you. I'm an attachment coach and I specialize in the anxious avoidant dynamic. I really love working with people going through breakups, just trying to move through a painful situation. And as always, I hope that you find this letter insightful and helpful.
I'm looking forward to doing running commentary with you again, Amy. So let's dive straight into Melissa's letter. Okay. Melissa writes, Dear Ken and Amy, my ex and I were together for 5 years. He's Korean and I'm of a mixed race. We were classmates in art school in China, then he moved to Amsterdam. One night I had a layover in Amsterdam and we met up after 2 years. We walked the cobblestone streets, talking. That night I was hit by a train. I fell in love. But I left and didn't really expect to hear from him again as the distance between us was so great. But as soon as I returned to China, he began love bombing me, texting me constantly. He wrote letters and made paintings. Whoa. We would call for hours. One day, he spontaneously bought a ticket to Beijing. We passed a dreamlike week, and soon after his visit, I bought a ticket to Amsterdam. But when he asked me what was going to happen between us, I still replied in a non-committal way, let's see what fate has in store for us, because I was worried about the long distance. Yeah, fair enough. But our problems seemed to be solved when, during my next visit, COVID happened. I lost my job, couldn't return to China. Suddenly, I was living with him. We were together, though, so it was the happiest time of my life. I wanted to make everything work. I began teaching online to make money and sharing rent. But when I told him I wanted to build something together, his face clouded over. I'm going to take a pause here. Amy, what are your thoughts so far?
Wow. Well, first, I just want to say, Melissa, you have such a beautiful writing style. And the way you're telling this story is, I feel like I'm there with you, walking the cobblestone streets. I have to say, right off the bat, just through an attachment lens, it sounds like your ex has a fearful avoidant attachment style, leaning dismissive avoidant. And I say this because, um, he seems to be coming on strong in the beginning, very hot and heavy, intense. And later on in the letter, the dismissive side comes up, and we'll get to that. But you mentioned the love bombing and you mentioned hours on the phone. An interesting thing about fearful avoidance is that They love to behave as if they're in a relationship without actually being in one. And
Yeah.
they're often very good at it, right, Ken? Before a conversation is had or a commitment is made because they don't feel triggered yet. So that is what I think is happening so far.
That's interesting insight because obviously you've read ahead, and I should say for context, I have yet to read the letter in its entirety because usually when I do these readings, I go in blind. But I will say I agree with the premise of what you set out, and I gotta say to add to what you said, it's my first time hearing that someone with an insecure attachment has love bombed someone by not only writing letters but making paintings. Like to me, when I hear that, I'm like, God, that's a lot. Not to say that it's, by any means bad to receive that. Yay, love that. I think that, out of all the, say, problematic behaviors that can come up in dating, love bombing, it feels good to be on the receiving end of from time to time. But I gotta say, letters and paintings, like that's a lot. And I could see how this is starting to turn into a bit of a whirlwind romance sort of thing, especially as COVID hits. You're, joining together and trying to create a life. But I tell you what, I could only imagine the the fear that might have started to build inside of you when you explicitly mentioned, I want to build something together, and his face clouds over, because that's really scary. And I think too that, prior to that, you saying in a non-committal way that, let's see what fate has in store for us. I think that's a reasonable thing to say when, he's asking you what's going to happen between us, because you've obviously got long distance. So I think for me, what I find really interesting is it's interesting how he asks for, a status update as you guys are quite far apart from one another. Yet when you're together, things seem to take a bit of a radical shift. It's like, well, hang on a minute. If he was so happy to have you over at his home during COVID, and prior to that was keen to see where things were at, why is he suddenly now seeming to shift his mind? I don't think things would have changed that dramatically. And I know you've read ahead, so you know what's going on. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Amy?
Yeah, wow. I so agree. Also, it's funny that you should mention the painting. That was my thought too. I thought, oh, wow, that is an intense form of love bombing. We don't usually see paintings, but actually, it does make sense because he's an artist by trade.
Oh,
And
that's
so,
right.
yeah, so I guess he's sort of, this is part of his love language. This is normal for him. But yes, and I love the way, Melissa, you said his face clouded over when you were talking about the future and asking for more commitment in future plans. The thing is, avoidance, a dismissive avoidance or fearful avoidance, leaning dismissive, really love long distance relationships.
Mhm.
They thrive in them. And the reason is because there is a guaranteed amount of safety in space alone, in isolation, meaning you are not always going to be there and they know that. And that fact alone allows them to actually relax more into the relationship. But, and even when you were there over COVID, I think that he probably knew that there was going to be a time when you would move back or this wasn't going to last forever. And so it didn't really trigger maybe his being trapped wounds yet. Um, but as you can see, when you started wanting to have those conversations, he started to pull back, which, of course, is something that usually does happen when future plans are brought up.
Yes, which I find interesting that when he was bringing the plans up, it was all on his terms, but the minute you do it, it seems to have shifted. And I want to take a quick moment here before I return to Melissa's letter and keep reading. I understand that under a regular context, it would be normal if, for example, Melissa's behavior had been, say, disagreeable to the guy that she's seeing. Like, let's just say, for example, her partner at the time saw some behavior that he didn't like. I think it would be normal then to bring that up, hopefully in conversation, being like, hey, I do like you, but before we talk about future plans, can we at least hash this over? But based on this letter, there doesn't seem to be anything that he was visibly caught up about, or, he was bothered by, which suggests to me that this is something that it was, this was a shift that came out of nowhere. And even if he was bothered by your behavior, which I don't believe he was, he should have still brought it up. So to me, I'm thinking something's not quite right here. Anyways, let's continue with Melissa's letter. So after 1 month, we visited my parents together who live in France. The first night here, he mentioned to me that his best friend was a girl. He told me that his friend was quote unquote precious to him. He had shared a bed with her, they'd shared everything, and he had considered dating her, but hadn't wanted to ruin the friendship. He said I might meet her, and he was quote unquote curious to see how I reacted because all his other girlfriends had disliked her. I asked him if I disliked her, would he be willing to move on? He said yes, but I felt sick. We went back to Amsterdam, but within a few weeks, he asked me, when are you returning to your parents in France? I was deeply hurt. Well, that goes back to what you were just saying there before, Amy. During the subsequent conversations about living together, he told me that I made him feel quote unquote too secure and that he knew being with me would mean losing himself. He also wasn't financially ready. I cried myself to sleep for several nights. I do want to continue, but I want to take a moment here just to say there's a lot in that paragraph alone that I think needs to be unpacked. Amy, what are your thoughts?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you paused here because absolutely, absolutely. The thing that jumps out at me first is when he uses this phrase, too secure, when he is faced with potential, more commitment that Melissa, was bringing up. And he says, you make me feel too secure. It obviously, right off the bat, that somebody securely attached would never say, you are making me too secure. And when I hear this, I immediately think of him saying, I'm bored. This isn't dramatic enough for me.
Yes.
Um, this isn't, spicy enough for me. And those are the reasons why I think he has more of a fearful avoidant attachment style. Because, contrary to popular belief, once a dismissive avoidant is in a relationship with someone, one of the things that actually does make them feel happy and content in that relationship is security. They don't like the drama, they don't like the fighting or the chaos. They like everything to be peaceful and harmonious. And that is kind of what security is, or a big part of it. So when he says, you make me feel too secure, I think that that is both a red flag and an indication of his insecure attachment style. Um, and also, we can't ignore this situation with this girl friend, this friend that's a girl. You know, reasonable minds may differ on whether or not men and women can really be friends, especially when there's an attraction there, at least one way. But the way that he's describing this girl to me sounds a little bit problematic. The fact that he said he considered dating her, or they wanted to date but they didn't want to ruin the friendship, that already tells you there that there at least is a spark of romantic feelings there, that he has thought about it and he really cherishes her. And now there's nothing wrong with that, separate and apart from your relationship with him. But you are not wrong to have felt concerned over this. Definitely something to take note of. And I think the most appropriate thing that he could have said to make you feel better is to say, hey, listen, I have this friend who I really value. I love her. She's my best friend, and I would love for you to meet her. I would love for, her to be a part of our lives, for you to be a part of her life, and that would make it a completely different thing. The way he approached this, in combination with his too secure comment, to me is screaming fearful avoidant. What do you think, Ken?
I completely agree with everything you've said. I think that it's because I mean, look, whilst a lot of avoidance, DA or FA, can have an X in the wings or to have close friends in the wings from time to time, there's something about this that is just really not okay and suggests to me that, there's a lot of intimacy control going on here. The fact that he said, he'd considered dating this person but didn't want to ruin the friendship. To me, I'm just like, what's going on here? Like, why would that be such a barrier if, this is someone who's been a best friend to you for, for all this time? And also, it's a bit of a glaring red flag that so many friends of his dislike her. Now, we don't know what the reason for that dislike could be. It could be insecurities, or it could be very genuine and they're like, no, this person's not okay. But the way he's talking about her makes it seem like she's a goddamn ex. It sort of makes it seem like this is an intimate person in his life who he wants to have around. And I think it's interesting how, alongside that, within a few weeks, he's also asking you when you're returning to your parents in France. It sort of feels like he's controlling the intimacy as you're together in Amsterdam. Like to me, it sort of feels, and even before that too, when you're in, I think when you were living in France for a bit too, it sort of feels like there's a lot of moving the proverbial chess pieces of his life in order to manage how he feels about himself. And I don't like the fact that he's, you know, asked you in such a very abrupt and also offensive way when you're returning to your parents in France. You know, it seems to me like rather than just bring it up being like, hey, can we talk about, future plans? He's just expecting that you'll go. So again, I feel like, consistent with what I said previously, there's a lack of communication going on here about his feelings. But at the same time, it's also very hot and cold. On one hand, he's introducing you to intimate people in his life, and then also suggesting that, you'll want to think about potentially moving away from him.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, Ken. I love that you brought that up, this control over the flow of the intimacy, this control over what the relationship is, when it is, who she meets. That is also, a more avoidant trait. Avoidantly attached people do like to have more control over the pace of the relationship. This, I think, is definitely more a fearful avoidant thing, like you said, with the hot and cold and the inconsistency. Um, and yeah, I don't love the way this sounds. You know, it sounds like there might be a little manipulation going on, and it definitely sounds like it's all on his terms. It seems like, Melissa, you are making a lot of the sacrifices and kind of moving around his schedule and moving around his life. And of course, that's never fair in a relationship, and that will, plant the seeds for mistrust and resentment.
Agreed. And I feel like this, even in this paragraph alone, the seeds for what's going to come up in the future will soon bear some pretty rotten fruit. So let's dive into the rest of Melissa's letter. So, about a week before I left, I entered his apartment after going to buy him a birthday gift. He was in a video call with a girl and hung up as soon as I opened the door. I suspected it was his female friend, but said nothing. We'll come back to that. I spent the next 2 years getting qualified as a teacher. We would call daily and talk for hours. I would visit him once every 3 months. I was applying for a job in his home country as well as in the Netherlands. When I landed a job in Korea, I was ecstatic because it was a solution for us to be together. Meanwhile, his living situation in the Netherlands was so bad he was sleeping on the couch of his friend for several months. Still, he at first refused to go back to Korea, saying he was on the cusp of his breakthrough as an artist. But after a long and terrible argument, I finally convinced him to move with me. I spent the next 2 years in Korea living alone. He always said his career wasn't in the right place to start a life together. He spent all his time in his studio painting and complained about seeing me on the weekends. I began to feel like I was a box he had to check. He was obligated to see me 2 times a week, but no more. He eventually moved back in with his parents to quote unquote save money for our future. Towards the end of our relationship, visits reduced to once a week, and he would just come late at night to sleep with me, sometimes without sex, and leave early in the morning. His excuse was he was preparing for his solo show. 3 or 4 times he planned a bigger trip together, which always made me happy, but I always got the impression it was from a sense of obligation. The first year, we had a big fight after I caught him secretly calling another female friend. I noticed voice calls logged on his computer that he left open, and I saw that they would talk all night long, almost every night, and greet each other with good morning every day. This was more than he did for me. It broke my heart. To my lasting shame, I punched a sofa while crying alone in his living room. Unfortunately, the cushion was not very thick, and I broke my hand. Oh, I still carry shame for this incident. Okay, let's take a pause here. Melissa, just want to say, I can understand wanting to punch the sofa, and I'm so sorry that you broke your hand as a consequence. I think honestly, the sofa was probably the safest bet for venting a lot of that rage and anger out. But I can understand feeling terribly embarrassed because if you're not the kind of person who would ever feel like you're a jealous mess or you're someone with anger issues, I can understand this being maybe a very out of character moment for you and feeling like you're a crazy ex. But Amy, do you want to take it away? Like, oh my God, this is like a red flag city.
Oh my goodness, I know. And Melissa, I just want to echo what Ken said because it's so important. When I was reading your letter and I saw, my heart broke for you because, my heart breaks for you for what happened leading you to punch the couch, but it's so unfair that you have to carry shame around for that very natural human expression. So please, I hope that you hear us when we say, you can release that shame. There is nothing shameful in what you did. You were very upset and you thought you were, you know, uh, taking your anger out on a non-living object that was supposed to be soft, the couch, and you ended up hurting your hand. And I'm so sorry. And please let yourself release that shame because there's nothing to be ashamed about. Um, you know, I'm so sorry to read this because I can only imagine how heartbroken you were when you realized that he was speaking with these women in such intimate ways. You can only imagine if they were speaking overnight, if he was texting her good morning and good night every single day, which is more communication than you said was happening between the two of you. You know, even even if you painted this in the best light, it's still not good. I don't see a way that he could have explained that and it would have made sense and been okay, given that you two were in a relationship. Um, it's definitely inappropriate. It definitely does sound like perhaps he was entertaining some kind of relationship with at least one other person, whether that be a very, very close friendship, that perhaps, was crossing into the emotional fair territory. But it's definitely not appropriate. It's not okay. And it is very uncomfortable and heartbreaking. Um, you know, it's really you are in a hard position because you spent so much time trying to plan a life with him, and you're living in different countries and you're moving around and you're pouring yourself into this relationship. And, um, you know, he's not giving you back at this point the appropriate amount of commitment and respect and communication that you absolutely deserved.
I completely agree with everything that Amy was saying. And I also want to say, too, that it's pretty egregious behavior that he's hiding these calls with his so-called female friends. If it was just a chat between a friend, why would there be any need to hide any of this sort of stuff? To me, it feels like there are secrets being made, lies, a lot of hoarding as well, too, meaning that it seems like he has a harem of women who he turns to for feeling, external validation whenever he doesn't feel good about himself. And as you've said repeatedly, Melissa, I'm so sorry that you felt like you being in this intimate relationship with him felt like it had become obligation to him. Like that's an awful thing to feel like you're just a box to tick. That's so dehumanizing. And it just makes you probably feel like, I felt like I was a visitor to my own romantic relationship, and I wasn't even able to have the proper experience with my partner. And when he was coming back at night to sleep with me, it would definitely be, it was without sex, it was lacking in any intimacy. And yet it's interesting how hypocritically he's able to provide intimacy with these other women who aren't even in a relationship with him. Like I could imagine just feeling like, what the fuck, dude? I can see you do it for them. Why can't you do it for me? So, and the thing is, he probably knows that he's doing this. Like, I know a lot of avoidant attachers, even the severe ones, who know what they're doing in these moments, and it's all to manage the intimacy in their relationships. But it's so emotionally devastating on people like yourself. So, continuing on, Melissa writes, in Korea, I also noticed a very unhealthy family dynamic. His parents didn't want to accept me. His mother saw me as an enemy, trying to take her son away. Enmeshment. She told me he had betrayed her by choosing me. His sister made up a lie that I had complained he had no job. After the first year in Korea, I decided that I would give him an ultimatum. I told him I was leaving and returning to Europe. If he wanted me to stay in Korea, he needed to make a commitment. He encouraged me to leave, so I listened and found a job in Italy. Meanwhile, he proposed to me out of the blue and promised that he would come with me to Europe. Whoa. Our relationship began to break down 3 months before our scheduled departure. His mother began to pressure him, telling him he was giving up his career as an artist and his life would be ruined. He was too passive to cancel the marriage, but again complained he was on the cusp of his breakthrough and couldn't move. If I asked him probing questions about our future, he would become silent, like a robot. So I returned the ring. I then discovered that within weeks of proposing to me, he'd begun to engage more intensely again with the female friend, even visiting her house late at night. He said she had a breakup and needed his emotional support. Bullshit. About a year after he saw me break my hand, he returned to the same behavior. Something snapped inside me. I cried and cried. Faced with my emotion, he shut down. Within 1 month, he broke up with me. He told me that I never tried hard enough with his parents. Whoa. I didn't respect his art career and wanted to rush him, and that I couldn't accept his innocent female friendships. Everything was my fault. He told me my perfect state was when I had told him all those years ago, Let's see what fate has in store for us. I cried and humiliated myself and attempted to negotiate. I accepted all the blame for everything. I was never able to give up on him, even when he was ending things. My last words to him were, please call me. I was discarded after 5 years of waiting for him. He never attempted to contact me in the 3 months since. All right, before we go into Melissa's questions, I don't know about you. I just need to decompress from all of that because that's really quite fucked up. Amy, do you want to share your thoughts as I'm sort of coming together with all this?
Yeah. No, I know. And I think you'll share my sentiment, Ken. The first thing that I'm thinking is the audacity.
Yes.
Um, you know, how dare he say that your ideal state was when you said in the beginning, let's just see where this goes because of the long distance. It is so audacious because that is how you felt. And perhaps you would have remained in that frame of mind and not pursued this relationship with him had he not love bombed you and gave you every indication that the distance wouldn't be a thing. And you entered into this relationship on the pretense that this person was really into you and willing to put in the work because that's what it seemed like he was doing, and then everything fell apart. So for him now, years later, to say, I liked you better when you were kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Again, this is such fearful avoidant behavior. And again, I hope everyone understands that when I'm referring to any kind of unhealthy behavior with any kind of attachment style, I say it with love and compassion because I understand that everything is coming from trauma. And at the same time, we have to lovingly call these behaviors out because if we don't, we won't recognize them and we can't heal. But back to this audacious fellow. Um, also, I want to just rewind a moment. This behavior with talking to the other women, I also think, Melissa, I hope you know that none of this means that there was anything wrong with you, that you weren't giving enough to the relationship, that you weren't a good enough partner. I think a lot of that was a combination of him using other people as a source of validation, like you said, Ken, and also I think as a source of numbing, as a source of stress relief. Instead of properly dealing with his problems and his issues and his stress, he numbed with people, which is sort of the same thing as numbing with alcohol or drugs or porn. And so I do think he was numbing, and I do think he was self-sabotaging the relationship with you because you were such a good, healthy partner.
Yeah.
Now, just fast forwarding, yeah, and sorry, Ken, I'll let you pop in. I just
No, no,
want
no. You keep going because I was going to say I do have my own 2 cents to add in a second, but I'll let you keep going.
Yes. Yes. And so, enmeshment, and I know, Ken, you're going to talk about this too, but this unhealthy dynamic between him and his mother and his sister, it is both chaotic and it is both enmeshed, meaning that the boundaries and there's not an appropriate relationship between he and his mother. And a lot of people, a lot of adults that have some sort of avoidant attachment do come from a home where they are enmeshed with one of their parents. And what that means is growing up, the parents' needs and wants were more important than the child's. And that builds a lot of resentment and that manifests in these kinds of behaviors. Ken, take it away because I know hopefully you've cooled down so that you can give us your thoughts.
I was about to explode on this guy. So yeah, I think I want to continue with what you were saying with regards to enmeshment. I sort of think, fuck his mum and fuck his sister. Like, I mean, to me, it seems like they could not come to grips with the fact that he is a failing artist. Let's just be clear about this. This man's a bit of a dreamer. And you were absolutely right. Like when you initially said, Amy, like, I think he's a dismissive, leaning, fearful avoidant. I couldn't see it at first, but now that I'm here, I'm like, I can absolutely see it. On the basis that, in my experience, dismissive avoidance would never get themselves into this position. Like, I mean, in my experience, dismissive avoidance may put themselves into jobs they don't particularly love, but they just think that's just the way it is. Whereas fearful avoidance, I find, oscillate between like hyper success and hyper failure with a lot of their stuff. And they also tend to be quite romanticized. Sorry, they romanticize a lot of aspects of their life. And, that's especially true in something like art, where it's like, oh, everything's going to work out in the near distant future. It's like, well, this is just like you and your relationship. You like talking about these breakthroughs, but you're not actually committed to making a breakthrough. And I understand art is a field where there's a lot of struggle, but lest we forget in psychology and also with attachment, these things play out even outside of romantic relationships. And I know a lot of fearful avoidants who are afraid of actually taking those necessary steps to have the thing that they've always wanted because they then get into their head being like, but what if I make a mistake? What if I'm not good enough? What if this doesn't work out for me? And it's all their anxiety coming to the surface, causing them to then self-sabotage and prevent them from having the thing that they want. And I feel like with regards to his mum and his sister, they, I think, really model the behavior that you're also experiencing with him. As Amy said, intensity and probably, and given the fact that they were also commenting on how you've lied and they don't like you, suggests to me these are women who are probably quite cutting and also not particularly nice, even in a family setting. Because if they're doing this to you, what are the chances that they haven't done this with him as well, too? There is a good possibility that whilst he may have grown up as a bit of a golden child, I wouldn't be surprised if he's also had some pretty barbed tongued language from time to time in his familial dynamics. So, the way he's probably behaving with you is probably like how he was brought up with his parents and also his sister as well, too. As for the final, like the final end of this entire experience too, him re-quoting you being like, let's see what fate has in store for us. To add to what Amy was saying before, I find it interesting that he revealed that that was his quote unquote perfect state, because to me it seems like, again, he liked it seems he liked the idea of the relationship, but not the actual reality of the relationship. He was totally okay when it was long distance and go with the flow. But the minute things started to ramp up, that's when the insecurities started. He's introducing you to his friend. And on that note of introducing you to, well, that friend, the same one who he then went on to support through their tough time. When I said bullshit earlier, I want to make it very clear. I was not saying like his friend hadn't gone through a breakup. I'm confident she probably did. But what I find disarming is the fact that, he felt the need to just lurch and rescue her from her emotional experience. It's like, listen, she needs a therapist, and you shouldn't be going over to her place at night to support her, because I will say this from my own experience. When you are going through a breakup, and let's just say you are a straight woman, if you got a guy friend coming to support you when you are that vulnerable, your likelihood of letting things escalate into a very sexual experience are high, especially when you already have a girlfriend and you have these attachment issues. It's like, now we're just playing the field. Now we're just being, really not okay. And it's interesting how he can easily weave the excuse, oh, well, she just gone through a breakup, so I wanted to support her. It's like, no, dude, you knew exactly what you were doing and you were getting external validation. God only knows what probably happened there in that entire thing. And you can just write it off as, I was supporting her.
Oh my God, absolutely can. Um, also, you know, fearful avoidants love to do that. They love to sort of swoop in and be the rescuer. And I have heard from so many clients who say similar things have happened. There's an inappropriate friendship, and the partner never seems to be there for them in the best way with emotional support. But the moment their problematic friend steps in, especially where there's an inappropriate relationship going on, they've got to be there for that friend, and that friend really needs them. And I think also in and outside of relationships, fearful avoidants often find themselves tending to people and having a lot of toxic friends and relationships. And I think part of this is because when you are focused on someone else's stuff, you don't have time to look at yours. When somebody is going through something seemingly worse than yours and you are kind of their savior, that completely it's another way of numbing. It's another way of avoiding stopping, looking in the mirror, and assessing your own shit. And that is what's needed, and that is terrifying to a fearful avoidant. And fearful avoidants are very, very good at creating these sort of chaotic, self-sabotaging situations. And one thing we didn't mention yet is this short-lived proposal that kind of popped out when you were ready to leave, and then it didn't, of course, go through or continue. I'm so sorry, Melissa, because I imagine that at some point you were feeling like you were so close to finally getting the commitment that you wanted and finally having him come on board. And I just want to validate your experience. And I want to let you know that, again, it's always good for us to look at our behavior and think, okay, where could I have made healthier choices? What was my part in this? But in this situation, I really believe that I don't know if there's anything you could have done to have produced a different outcome. It seems like he's dealing with a lot of wounds that he might not have been willing to face or even talk to you about. And all of these things were creating these unhealthy self-sabotaging behaviors. And as you can see, even if you were trying to be the steady, secure partner, um, sometimes that's not enough. In fact, that's never really enough for the other person to come to the table in a healthy way.
Completely agreed. So, no, I think that it seems like you did the best you could given the circumstances, but it does seem to me like this is a guy who's got a lot of resistance and also very maladaptive behavior to wanting to actually work on himself as well too. Now, Melissa's got a couple of, well, not a couple. Melissa's got a few questions for us that we're going to answer now. So, first one is, can an avoidant trigger someone to become more anxious? My relationship prior to him was loving and respectful and ended in friendship. But with him, I reverted to an anxious, insecure, and suicidal version of myself that I'd only experienced once before when very young. Amy, would you like to answer this question?
Yes, absolutely, Melissa. The answer is yes. Um, an avoidant can absolutely and will absolutely trigger even a secure person to feel anxious. The difference, though, is that when a secure person is made to feel anxious consistently, and after some communication has been extended, they will leave the relationship. Secure people don't really stay in relationships with dismissive avoidants who are not willing to change and grow and heal. And this, by the way, I am not criticizing your behavior or the way you responded to him whatsoever. But to get back to your question, absolutely. Our attachment styles are on a spectrum, and a big component of what affects the manifestation of our attachment style is the attachment style of our partner. If somebody is very, very anxious and they have a secure partner, over time, they will learn to be through repeated exposure to security, they will grow to be more secure. But if an anxious person is with someone who is very avoidant, fearful avoidant, or dismissive avoidant, they will absolutely grow in their anxieties.
Completely agree. And I want to say I'm so sorry that you were taken back to a place where you felt anxious, insecure, and even suicidal. You wouldn't be the only one, but it's never, never okay to be put into that space. Relationships ideally should bring the best out of you and also make you feel like you're feeling at peace, happy, elevated. And when you're feeling the complete opposite to the point of having suicidal ideation, yeah, this relationship has done a lot of damage. It's traumatic, it's abusive, and it's not okay. So I'm sorry that you've gone through this, Melissa. And I can see another question is, I believe that he loved me, but I felt great shame for being unable to walk away at so many crucial turning points when he was clearly displaying a lack of commitment. Did I enable this person? I'll share my 2 cents in saying, I don't think you knew what you didn't know, meaning that you didn't know what you didn't know. You were probably unaware of these dynamics going on. And look, you can probably look back in time and be like, well, I should have walked away at the point when he was introducing me to his best friend, or at points when he was telling me, when are you going back to France? And it upset me. To which I say, sure, you could have done that. And maybe on one hand, we could say, I don't know if I'd say you enabled it. I'd say maybe you didn't feel safe enough to actually speak up for yourself and know how to, get out of that. Not to mention, if we run the clock back, weren't you also during COVID, during that particular, like some of those crucial turning points as well, too? Your options for going places would have been maybe very limited. And let's be real, a lot of us in these moments often do struggle to actually walk out once we've had so much emotional investment. Like, I don't know what you're going to say on this, Amy, but like, I feel like it's far easier said than done to say you should have left at this particular turning point when a lot of the, in my experience, I got to tell you, like, the more I've gotten through dating experiences, it's been easier to detach and, to do my own thing. But it's far harder when you don't have knowledge of these dynamics. You may not have emotional regulation skills. There's life getting in the way of it, which causes a lot of panic and stress. I don't think it's an easy decision to just, to walk away when even these signs are showing up, especially if this is your first time dealing with someone like this.
Yeah, I really agree, Ken. I love what you said. You don't know what you don't know. And Melissa, truly nothing can be more true when we are coming off of a painful breakup. It is so easy for us to beat ourselves up and to, criticize ourselves and say, you should have done this, I should have done that. And you did not know any better. And on top of that, if you do have a little bit of anxious attachment, which I do think you might have, there might be some fearful, avoidant, leaning anxious, or you might just have anxious attachment. First of all, there is nothing shameful in having an insecure attachment style, whether that be anxious, preoccupied, fearful, avoidant, or dismissive, avoidant. There is also nothing shameful in what we do. Unless you are going out intentionally causing harm to people, there's nothing shameful in what you're doing. You are making decisions from love. You are also probably making decisions from a place of a trauma response. And when you don't understand attachment theory and when you don't understand the mechanics of what happens to you when your attachment system is triggered, especially in an anxious and avoidant dynamic, you think that the universe is telling you to stay in this relationship, that it is that this feeling coming over you is so strong, and because it's so strong, it must be true. This must be, the best love of your life, and you have to pour yourself into it. And, once you learn about attachment injuries, you understand that a lot of that is a trauma response, and a lot of that intensity and determination to stay and to push is not actually from love. It's more motivated by fear. And still, there is nothing shameful in this. So I want you, please, if you take anything from this response, I hope that it is that there is nothing shameful in any of your behavior. You didn't know what you didn't know. And I know that you've probably learned a lot from now. And just lastly, were you enabling him? Um, you know, I don't think that it would be fair to say, yes, you were enabling him, because again, you didn't know. What you thought you were doing was being a good partner, was being flexible, was being kind. So in general, do anxious people enable avoidant behavior? Yes, but also kind of anyone who is in a relationship with a person with avoidant attachment, if they're in the relationship and the avoidant isn't changing, by nature that is enabling their behavior. But I don't think that you were doing that on purpose. I don't think that you were doing that for a long time. What do you think, Ken?
I completely agree. I was even going to give an example of what I think enabling would be. I think you were probably slowly but surely coming to grips with the reality of your relationship, Melissa. Like, I feel like over time, you were, shedding tears when he was saying or asking you, when are you going to go back to your parents, when you were in Amsterdam? And also, when he was introducing you to his best friend, I feel like a lot of these things probably happened quite suddenly and also probably started to eat away at the romance of your relationship. Where I feel like enabling comes in is when, say, you're dating a high functioning alcoholic and you're trying to hide their alcohol purchases, or you're trying to facilitate, you're trying to basically caretake their emotional well-being when they're having a bad time rather than actually looking out for yourself. Another example might be, say, when you have a partner who has an avoidant attachment style and it's quite severe, and you feel it is your responsibility to make them feel safe by giving them space and doing all the things that are talked about without getting anything back in return. When you are cutting yourself up into little pieces just to make someone else happy, where you're basically turning yourself into a pretzel to avoid setting off another person's reaction, then I think, and you're also, and this isn't your first time in the rodeo. Like you've done this a few times, and you find that you're doing this because you're so worried about causing any instability in your relationship because instability feels threatening to you because you're so scared of abandonment. You are enabling. That's my definition of it. But I feel like as every crack in your relationship with this guy progressed, I feel like it wasn't so much enabling. If anything, I feel like the romance of this was breaking, time and time again. And eventually it seems like you chose yourself, even if it probably felt like off the back of it that you had to chop off a leg, just to get out of there because of how badly hurt you were being made to feel by the end of this. Well, actually, I know he broke up with you abruptly, but I feel like, the gears were turning for you in terms of the fact that after he got you that ring, it seems like things weren't getting any better. And it seems like you were getting to a point where you were like, even if I don't want to do this, I'm sort of mentally and emotionally on the way out before he ultimately ended it. That's what I got from this. Amy, what are your thoughts on that?
I actually agree completely, Ken. The way that you described uh, Melissa sort of probably approaching a space where she might have let go too before he officially broke it off, I definitely sensed that throughout the entire journey of the letter for sure. And again, just to finish off that question, let's just say, even if you were enabling him, there's still no shame in that, right? You
No.
were in love, you were a person in a relationship who was trying desperately to make something work. And, we do these things when we're in love. We are wired to attach to people. We are wired to, you know, have connection and stay with people we love. So, I do hope that you give yourself a lot of compassion.
Completely agreed. And Melissa's got one final update for us that includes a question. So, Melissa writes, since this experience, I've been on 5 dates with someone that I really like. I've noticed, however, a huge difference in myself and the way I approach romantic relationships since my breakup with my avoidant partner. Do you think that going through these kinds of breakups can permanently rewire our brains? Because I realized I deeply fear exposing my budding feelings for this new person, whereas my old self used to follow my heart with more courage. I fear they will react to my growing desire for closeness and intimacy by punishing me and withdrawing. And this fear has caused me to literally feel as if I might faint at moments when my emotions feel too strong. I've been very afraid and have found it excruciatingly difficult to reciprocate when it comes to arranging for our next date, initiating conversations over text, or talking more about emotional topics. In short, I feel more avoidant myself now, and I hate it. I miss my old naivety and belief in love and trust in other people. Can you talk about the way these breakups might permanently change us? Okay, I love this question so much because I know, Amy, you and I have probably, I don't think we've ever explicitly talked about this behind the scenes, but I really get it and relate to it. I'm going to be very brief. I'll share a more expanded answer after I let Amy speak, but I will say, yes, these experiences permanently change us. And yes, you're probably going through a phase of feeling avoidant, but I can assure you, unless you have got a fear of intimacy, you haven't got avoidant attachment off the back of this. And I'll say more to that later. But Amy, what are your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, I love this question so much, Melissa. And also, you can really just hear your innocence and your sweetness and love in your questions. So, there's so much here. These are great questions, and there's so much information. And I love that you are asking these questions and self-reflecting in this way. So, yes, absolutely. Um, these experiences can rewire your brain, especially if you're in a relationship over time, over 5 years, and you are a little bit anxiously attached and you are having consistent interactions with a partner who is giving you avoidant responses or fearful avoidant responses. What this is doing is sort of conditioning you to be more anxious. Now, a funny thing happens. a lot of anxiously attached people do actually say, okay, now I think I'm avoidantly attached after this breakup because I am so afraid of going through the hell that I just went through. And and here's what I say to that, I have a reframe for you, and I hope that you can see what I'm trying to say, and I hope that you embrace it. You say you miss your naivete and your innocence and the way you used to just follow your heart. That is such a beautiful thing. But I also, and I don't think you should ever lose who you are and change who you are from a place of fear. But what if your nervous system and your subconscious mind, which are the spaces in us that hold our attachment style and our attachment responses, what if this new, more avoidant, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes, response is your way of sort of moving closer to secure? If you imagine the
Mhm.
attachment spectrum, imagine anxious all the way on the left and dismissive avoidant all the way on the right. Fearful is kind of playing around in the middle, but then in the dead middle is secure. So, if you are feeling a little more avoidant, that is also kind of an indication that you might be becoming more secure. It's actually healthy to not just go, heart first into new relationships. It's actually really healthy to be a little slower, trepidatious, not completely follow your heart. Because the truth of the matter is, it takes time to know people. And it's very easy and tempting to sort of go hot and heavy in the beginning. But if you are feeling yourself being more self protective, wanting to go slower, having more concerns about whether or not the other person can be a healthy partner, that's actually really healthy and that's really good. And I'll just say one more thing because I really want to hear what you have to say, Ken. But you can ask yourself this question, Melissa. If you ever think, okay, am I having an insecurely attached response, whether that be anxious or avoidant or fearful avoidant? Ask yourself this. Are the actions I'm taking or not taking, am I doing them from a place of fear or am I doing them from a place of truth? If you find yourself making decisions from a place of fear, that could be your attachment system, activating, trying to protect you somehow. And then in those moments, you can ask yourself, okay, what am I afraid of? And what do I need to soothe myself right now? And if you're coming from a place of truth, which sounds a little quieter and calmer in your mind and in your body, then okay, this is really what I want. And then just one last thing. I think, Melissa, it would be a really good idea for you to learn a little bit about somatic processing and nervous system regulation to help you calm yourself down when you feel those very intense bodily responses come up. You mentioned that sometimes you feel like you're going to faint. And I want you to know you are not alone. There's nothing wrong with you for those responses, but definitely look into some nervous system regulation to help you learn how to self soothe. Ken, what do you think?
Love everything you said, and I want to add to what you said. So I agree with what Amy has said about as a reframe, you are probably becoming more secure off the back of this on the basis that you've now got to look at things from a place of hypervigilance for a little bit. And I know we don't want you to stay here forever, but I remember when I first got back into things, my walls were as high as the Great Wall of China. I was really very, very afraid of being hurt again. And I was doing a period of friends with benefits. And I was making all the rules. I was controlling the intimacy because I was like, I don't want to go through that shit show again. And I think it's perfectly normal to go through that as long as you're upfront and clear about the fact that you're in that state. And I understand that fear of if I share my feelings, then people are going to run. That's fear of abandonment speaking. Now, that is understandable given the circumstance, and I'm not suggesting that you change that overnight. But one thing I did find in dating to help me overcome a lot of those fears was I found that if I was dating people where there were no real emotional investment or attachment, it became easy to start practicing speaking up for myself and seeing what the reaction was from people. And sure enough, over time, I realized me speaking up for my truth and my own emotions did not cause people to run away from me. It actually caused people to be very glad that I was expressing my truth. And I was like, then it's not clearly a case of me speaking up for myself. It must be something completely different. And sure enough, I found out what fear of intimacy finally meant. But my point to you is simply to say that you've just gone through a car accident in dating terms. You need time to readjust to getting back out on the road, getting in the vehicle, putting your hand on the steering wheel and taking things slowly to calm your nervous system down. Somatic exercises that Amy suggested would be a great way to do it. But I will say, my 2 cents in terms of like how do these change us? I think you will probably get back to a place where you feel a degree of like fun and joy around dating. You will probably not go back to feeling naive about this. But I want to make it very clear that, the more you arm yourself with knowledge about attachment and the more you learn about yourself and why you might be triggered in these particular settings, will I think ultimately lead you to feeling more confident when you're dating. Because I know for me now, like I can spot, attachment energy from a mile away. And I also know what my standards are for dating compared to what they used to be. And I think that my last piece on this is to say that whilst these experiences do permanently have an impact on changing not only the way we look at dating, but just the way we show up in life in so many other areas, because this is, it seriously hurts us. It puts us into rock bottom. If you're able to slowly but surely, find ways to challenge those fears that have come off the back of this, you will be able to regain and reclaim some of those fun elements of dating and relationships, but you'll be armed with what Amy was talking about, maybe those more avoidant parts of you that are like, hold up a minute, we need to assess the situation. Let's be more self-sufficient and not dive heart first into these experiences, because I think the danger of interpersonal experiences where we don't have an awareness of how we're feeling, what our gut's telling us, is frankly, we make silly choices. And we need to, especially if you lean anxiously attached, to be very, very mindful of how these interpersonal experiences are making us feel. Easier said than done. That's a conversation maybe for another day. But the point is that we do need to have a rigorous understanding of not blindly following our feelings and getting excited, because even though it can be a positive feeling, excitement doesn't always translate to success.
Oh my gosh, yes, I completely agree, Ken. That is such great advice. There's nothing more empowering, I think, than healing your attachment style, than
Mhm.
learning, what is driving your fears, what is driving this behavior that is causing pain to yourself and maybe your partner and your relationship, because these things are changeable, these things are healable. What they are, and I love, Melissa, how you mentioned in your previous question, can these things rewire your brain? Essentially, our attachment styles are just conditioning. They are programming that we received over time in childhood and maybe at other points in life. And we weren't born with them. They're not who we are intrinsically. And so, what that means is we have neuroplasticity. That means that we can change. We can actually rewire and recondition our attachment system. And that is huge. And honestly, even when you're in the process of healing attachment and just reading and learning about it, the amount of shame that falls off when you learn that these behaviors are not just they're not at all a character flaw or something defective in you. And I mean this for dismissive, fearful, and anxious preoccupied. These are just things that you were conditioned with, and it is so empowering to heal them. And Ken, you are so right. Once you, especially when you have an anxious attachment style, once you start learning about attachment and healing your wounds, dating becomes fun. And it becomes fun because, Melissa, you'll go into a date, you might like someone, and you will feel empowered to speak your needs and express your boundaries and embody both of those things so easily. Just like you're ordering chicken fingers, you'll be able to speak your needs that easily. And if the person's not on board and can't meet you where you are, then you'll leave, and it'll be okay. And it doesn't mean that they're bad, and it doesn't mean that you're bad. It just means there's an incompatibility. As you heal this fear around, what your needs will do to the other person, will these push somebody away? That will dissipate so much, and that is so freeing and liberating.
Agreed. And if you're lucky, you'll get a free dinner out of it, even if the date doesn't last.
Absolutely. And dessert.
And dessert. So, might as well take the opportunity to get something out of it, even if it doesn't last. So, with that being said, Melissa, Thank you for sending us this letter. And Amy, thank you very much for participating again as part of this podcast, I mean. And if people want to work with Amy, you're very welcome to. Please click the link in the bio. Amy is actually very available at the moment for taking on clients to work through grief off the back of an avoidant breakup, to work on their attachment styles. And I'm looking forward to seeing people for the next letter reading. And just as a final reminder, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. It really helps to know that we're heading in the right direction if you found it valuable. And last but not least, the submissions for the upcoming letter readings will be open in about a week's time, and I will make a public announcement for that on Instagram specifically. And if you would like to submit a letter, I know in a previous episode I said I'm looking to limit this to 500 words. I'm thinking of being lenient and maybe stretching it to 2,000 on the basis that it seems like we can actually cover, lengthier letters, reasonably well. So just letting everyone know, and there will be a fee charged to that as well too, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Thank you. And Amy, was there anything thing you want to say before we round out today's episode?
No, I think you covered it. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We love hearing your feedback. We love hearing your questions. We love connecting with you. And yeah, I can't wait to do this again.
Thank you very much for being here, Amy. Again, thank you, Melissa, and we look forward to seeing you guys for an upcoming episode.